Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Joyce Elliott with Get Loud Arkansas, and this is our usual Thursday Speak Truth to Power, and we are excited to have with us today Senator Clarke Tucker, who is going to talk to us about some bills that he filed. And we are all about engagement, you know, and he is working to make sure that anybody who is a voter has many restrictions that are removed. And so we're just going to let him talk to us about them and have this conversation. And I urge you to listen carefully because this is good change we're talking about.
We got to make good change and some good trouble, right?
Some good trouble, yes.
So I've filed 4 bills this week that empower voters, in my opinion. And they're not partisan, they're not ideological. We're all about just making sure that people can lawfully vote, right? So the first bill that I filed says that no voter should have to wait in line for more than 1 hour to vote on election day. This is a hard bill to be against, in my opinion. Nobody should have to wait more than an hour.
Yeah.
And the way the bill is set up, I mean, that's the policy goal of the bill, but the way the bill is set up is to say that the county boards of election commissioners, they have to have enough voting sites, or they can expand capacity in the sites they already have, but they just have to take the data that they have and make sure that they have enough capacity to make sure no one has to vote. No one has to wait in line for more than an hour to vote on election day. If someone ends up having to wait in line for more than an hour on election day, they can file a complaint with the state board of election commissioners, and then the state board can direct the county board of election commission for that county to say, hey, you got to do better next time.
Right.
You need to have more voting sites or
That's really good.
Yeah.
And for people who are fortunate enough that you don't know this is a problem, it can be a real problem for people who have so many other things to do, and you go to the polling stick and you're going to be in and out, and you're not even asking in and out, but make sure it's no longer than 1 hour. That is something. Surely it will pass, because we at Get Loud would really like to see that happen, I'm sure, along with everybody else in the state.
Awesome.
So what's the second one?
Yeah. So the second, third, and fourth all have to do with absentee voting.
Okay.
So I'll take them one at a time. Right now, when you submit an absentee ballot application, unless you check a box, it's automatically valid for 1 year, whether you realize it or not. And I've heard of people who have requested an absentee ballot for a primary, but they were only going to be out of town for the primary. They like to vote in person in the general election, but then the application was valid for a full year without them realizing. So they would go to vote in person in the fall, and people would say, you can't vote. We've already sent your absentee ballot to you by mail. And they get confused. They suspect fraud, or whatever.
Yeah.
And we want to avoid that as much as possible. So this is a very simple change. When you submit your absentee ballot application, if you want the application to be valid for a year, you have to affirmatively check that box. So that way, that's what's happening. So
otherwise, it's just good for the next election the election that's going to happen right now.
That's right. Plus a runoff.
Plus a runoff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's really good, because I think it would be a lot easier for the county clerks to change what they're doing, as opposed to trying to get every voter out there to make that change that doesn't seem normal. So if you have to opt in, that's a good thing.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
So the other two, so the next one, if you've ever filled out an absentee ballot application,
I have. Yes. And it's a monster.
It is. It's a monster, and there's a lot of legal jargon in there. So the point of the second bill is to simplify the absentee ballot application process. And we want it to be uniform across the entire state. But the main thing is for it to be easier to understand. So I've got language in the bill to say, you don't have to use, the official way of saying you don't have to use legal mumbo jumbo, because there's a lot of terms on that application that unless you have legal training, you may not, and even if you do have legal training, it's still hard to understand. Yeah. So it's to put it more in simple terms that everybody can understand, because if you're submitting your absentee ballot application, we want you to vote, and we don't want your application to be dinged for some reason that doesn't make a lot of sense.
I voted absentee for the first time in 2020 because we were at the height of COVID and so forth.
Right.
I had no idea, how much mumbo jumbo there was. I was so intimidated by that ballot. I read it, and then had 2 other people check it for me to make sure I had not, checked the wrong thing. And I said then, it has to be better than this. And so, more good work.
All right.
You're racking it up, bud.
All right. Because if your ballot application is dinged, your voice is not heard for that race because you don't get to
That's right.
cast your vote. Yeah.
And by the way, I think I'm remembering correctly, I think Arkansas had the highest percentage of absentee ballots rejected the last election than any other state. I'll check that and make sure, but I'm pretty sure and I can see why because it is really a difficult document.
I'm glad you told me that.
Yeah.
That'll help my
I
argument
think that's
for
the
this
case.
bill.
If it's not, I'm sure people out there will correct me. will correct me.
I'm going to look into that because that'll help me
Yeah.
with the bill.
It will.
Yeah. So then the fourth total bill, third one related to absentee ballots is, y'all may be familiar with the term canvass because you go knock on someone's door when you're asking them to vote. That's also the word they use when they're counting absentee ballots, and they check to make sure that the voter statement is correct. Now that we have the voter ID requirement, that the voter ID is in there, and that the ballot is in and everything is sealed properly. So this third bill is about the canvassing process, and it's supposed to clarify the process by which the ballots are counted. So it's set forth that a poll worker does the first count, then the election commission comes behind them, and it's laid out step by step how that's supposed to happen to make sure that as many ballots are counted as possible. There's a couple other things in the bill that I particularly like. For example, a lot of absentee ballots are marked as provisional because they may have not checked a box on the application or some such thing. And this bill would require that voter to be notified as soon as possible that their ballot has been marked as provisional and how they can cure their ballot, which means to fix whatever the problem is so that their ballot is counted. And they have to be notified as soon as possible, but no later than 48 hours after the ballot is marked as provisional. So that's something in there that I really like. And then there was an issue with an election for state representative in the 2020 race where there was a box of absentee ballots that was mismarked. So those ballots, I'm not sure if they were ever counted, which is, of course, is a problem. So I have in there the process by which boxes are marked and what the chain of custody has to be to make sure that no one's ballot is ever lost. Because if you cast your ballot, no matter how you voted, right, we want your vote to be counted.
And by chain of custody, you mean?
So there's a record of who has custody of the ballot at all times.
At all times, yeah.
And that term is borrowed from criminal law because you might have a murder weapon. And if you don't know where the murder weapon was between 6 and 8 p.m. and then it gets another fingerprint on it, then you can't use it in the prosecution. And so the chain of custody means you have a record of who had that murder weapon at all times. So that way you know where it is, who had it. And so we're borrowing that term to say, hey, here's the absentee ballot, and we have a record of who was in possession, the election commission, the circuit clerk, whatever the case might be, who was in the possession of the ballot at all times. So everything's accounted for.
Very good. And all of these bills are nonpartisan.
That's right.
It only has to do with civic engagement and voting, making sure everybody has the same opportunity. Everybody's ballot should be counted.
That's right.
But we shouldn't have to go through all the mumbo jumbo and the legalese, even if it's an absentee ballot.
That's right.
So,
yeah.
Thank you so much for
Absolutely.
that. This is the kind of work Get Loud gets very excited.